Are you sitting comfortably?
Oh, yes, yes.
Then I'll begin.
Even when you're just sitting around, we're rocking the talk.
Today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. We're in the second hour of this live broadcast, live and direct here on TNT, today's News Talk. And now we're going to shift gears back over to the Middle East for an in-depth discussion, really a broad update on what's actually happening here. I'm very pleased to welcome onto the stage a fantastic independent journalist, a great writer, and a great reporter who is steeped in this topic, does understand it very well, has spent time on the ground in the region as well. Robert Inlakesh is joining us right now. Robert, really appreciate you coming on for this talk.
Thanks for having me.
Robert, I mean, there's a lot of ground to cover. First, I want to get your reaction on some of the latest developments right now. And then let's talk about where this situation is right now in Gaza and more broadly with the West Bank. Also, a lot going on there that's not being reported. There's so much going on. I think that the case of this, Robert, is the media having trouble knowing where to focus. But let's start with the news on Monday. The International Criminal Court with the filing of warrants or potentially arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the defense minister in Israel. There's also three Hamas officials mentioned in this as well. Separate analysis there, but just on the Israeli side, a lot of people are shocked that this actually has happened. What do you make of it?
Well, there's two separate ways to analyze this. Of course, there is ample evidence, more than ample evidence, to suggest that Israel has been committing war crimes. And so it's not a surprise there that the chief prosecutor of the ICC has grounds to issue warrants or call for the issuance of arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, his defense minister. So that's one side of it. And a lot of people would say, why did it take so long? And that comes into the other side of it, which I admit I don't have insider knowledge on. However, having looked at the situation and covered it from the start, I would say that in a way, there was massive pressure on the International Criminal Court to actually do something. The chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, since the start, has been urged to do something. And he's been sitting on the sidelines. He even went on a trip to go and meet with different officials and the families who lost people on October 7 on the Israeli side, and was outed during his trip for being there before then going to Ramallah on a quick trip in order to meet with Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority president, and also to try and meet with people from Palestinian human rights groups. And they refused to meet him because they saw that what he was doing there was essentially a PR stunt to cover the fact that he was there to visit the Israelis. Also, his first speech on the issue, he jumped in front of a camera in Cairo, Egypt. He started condemning Hamas. He started saying that Hamas had committed war crimes, already drawing conclusions on that front, and lecturing them on Islamic morals and ethics. And when it came to the Israelis, his language was very tame in comparison. So there was great pressure on him publicly because of his previous actions. There was also great pressure on the court because the International Court of Justice has been very active on this case. I think they shocked the world for the unanimous decision of the judges on the court in favor of South Africa in the genocide case. They've issued additional provisional rulings. They are now considering taking further action as we are on the cusp of a potential full-scale invasion of Rafah, which would be a catastrophe for civilians in the Gaza Strip. And so at this point, we heard for about a month that potentially the ICC was going to take action. There was all these threats coming towards the ICC. And I believe that Karim Khan knew that if he was going to save the image of the ICC, he had the grounds to act. He needed to do something. And he has finally taken that action. And that, of course, as well saves his own image in history, potentially. And also it saves the image of the International Criminal Court. And of course, there have been all of these accusations leveled at it for years that it should be renamed the African Criminal Court because it doesn't go after anyone outside of Africa. Now, the problem with it is that the United States have come out and said that they don't have jurisdiction, despite the fact that the court found previously, years ago, that it does have jurisdiction because the state of Palestine is a signatory to the Rome Statute, which governs the court. And this then, of course, calls into question the very legitimacy of the entire court itself, which would then in turn basically say that the arrest warrant issued for Vladimir Putin of Russia is invalid. And that's what the United States is doing. And so the Europeans looked at that, they're signatories to the Rome Statute, and they've said, no, we'll go along with this because they don't want to delegitimize the court as the United States and Israel are currently doing. So there's quite a bit to break down when it comes to this decision. I think on my part here, it's speculation, of course, educated speculation, but speculation nonetheless, as to why the chief prosecutor decided to issue these warrants at this moment. Whether this will have any real impact, it's more of an image impact on the Israelis. Now Netanyahu and Gallant are now wanted technically by the ICC. There's this ICJ case, which has ruled that there's a plausible case that genocide is being committed by the Israelis. And on top of that, all the human rights organizations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Israel's own B'Tselem, have not only documented what's happened during the past 8 months, and B'Tselem not too long ago came out with a report that they issued, which alleged Israel was manufacturing famine in Gaza, but they have also all been on the record condemning Israel as an apartheid regime. So for the image of the Israelis, this is very damaging, whether or not there will ever be any real action or arrests carried out.
Well, it sounds like from your analysis of this, Robert, that this is really a litmus test for the legitimacy of the ICC more than any other case in its history. This is the one that really defined whether it can survive as a body or not. But it's an incredible series of events. First, you have the International Courts of Justice, this case filed by South Africa. That was a huge wave of bad publicity for Israel and a lot of encouragement for Palestinian supporters. And then you had the vote in the United Nations for Palestinian statehood. This was a positive result as well. And now you have the ICC filing here. Hopefully, a lot of people hope that this is going to go the distance and that due process will win the day, because there just seems to be quite a lot of evidence for the case in the ICJ, but also in the ICC. So it's an extraordinary series of events, Robert, and Israel is really cornered from an international point of view in terms of their reputation, their image, the statements they've made, threatening the ICC and things like that. This is not good optics, and it's not really helping their case at all. And a lot of people are now questioning the legitimacy of Israel as a sort of state in terms of what it believes it can get away with. And in history, the legitimacy of any state is really determined by what their neighbors think of it, what the international community thinks of it. And right now, this is not really a good look for Israel. Your thoughts?
No, not at all. And I believe that these are essentially nails in the coffin for the Israelis. They don't have legitimacy like they had before. And this reflects a great loss, which they've really inflicted upon themselves since October 7. And in many ways, that was predictable that they would lash out in this way. And this has been sanctioned by the United States. The United States and Israel, I believe, the governments made the decision on October 7 that they would pursue a genocidal policy, that they would pursue war crimes. They would pursue the massive destruction of Gaza in an unprecedented way to send a message to the region, to send a message to the world, and to try and recover what Israel lost in its so-called deterrence capacity. And also the embarrassment dealt to their weapon systems, their AI technology that they were using, their whole image of security in general on October 7. And since then, the Israelis, their reaction has in fact done the very opposite. It's only deteriorated further their security image and their image as these great warriors in the eyes of the world and in the eyes of the region. And also, as well, the legitimacy of the entire state has come and is being called into question at this point, because the solution is either there is a one-state solution. At this point, two states is never going to be allowed. There's either one state with equal rights, or Israel can only succeed in the long term as a exclusively Jewish ethno-state if it is to either expel or exterminate the Palestinians. And so people at this point, after seeing them actually carry out genocidal acts in Gaza and ethnic cleansing on a mass scale, are looking at this and considering whether Israel should exist. So we're back to the question of 1948, not 1967 borders. So there has been a dramatic shift. The Israelis have lost, I believe, international legitimacy. I don't think it's their actions are defensible anymore. I don't believe that any of their arguments are plausible at this point, and nobody is backing them who has a heart. It's only a few Western governments that continue to back the Israelis in their horrifying crimes against humanity, many of which we haven't seen since World War II.
I think you brought up a couple of really important points there, Robert. One is, I mean, the term apartheid is now permanently attached to Israel. In any conversation around the world, that's never going to go away. And the other thing is, and I think you summed this up perfectly, Robert, you said we're not talking about 1967 borders anymore. That was the sort of, basis for the two-state solution concept. We're talking about 1947 now. And so this is something that can't be resolved with the current political structure in Israel, because it seems to me, Robert, that the debate between liberal Israelis and the hardcore ethno-nationalists, Likudites, is like they're not arguing about whether to stop. They're arguing about how to carry it out, either through ethnic cleansing or just total annihilation and genocide. That seems to me the internal Israeli debate. There are people that, a few protesters on the street in Israel, but I don't hear any real debate on, bringing this to a halt and finding a resolution, not at the political level. You see people on the streets, but not in the political chambers of government. So are they on a crash course here? Are they stuck in a kind of death spiral?
I believe so. And like you noted, there's little dissent from within the Israeli society itself. And then you have to ask yourself the question, for instance, you'll see on these mainstream media shows like Piers Morgan, he always asks the question, should Hamas be able to govern? What should they do to Hamas after October 7, which of course is a ridiculous argument given the atrocities committed against the Palestinians over the years. To try and say that what Hamas did is uniquely evil in this conflict is just utterly ridiculous, to be honest. But we're going to take that at face value. Let's say they eliminate Hamas. The same problem will arise because they're not giving Palestinians their human rights. So let's say they completely annihilate Hamas. It's not going to happen, by the way. They haven't even taken out the other some dozen in total armed groups which are operating in the Gaza Strip. Even the smaller ones, they haven't dismantled in any area properly. So they're not going to do it. But let's say they do, for argument's sake. Let's say they take out Hamas. The same thing is going to happen. People are going to continue to resist, and the population in Gaza and the West Bank is going to continue to grow. The people will continue to live without rights. And because they continue to live without human rights and under siege and occupation, they are not going to just sit there and take it. They don't have any choice but to resist. They have no options. So the exact same thing will happen. There will be more resistance. There will be new groups which emerge in the case that you dismantle Hamas. The only possible solution is either you have a diplomatic solution to the conflict in some way, shape, or form, or you have an overwhelmingly violent solution. And you can't just leave Gaza there to linger. The whole reason October 7 happened is because Israel and the United States as well believed that they could just leave the 2.3 million people in Gaza in an unlivable condition, as per the declaration of the United Nations experts. They said as of 2020, it was unlivable. You cannot just leave them there to linger. They thought that they could. And that's the reason why October 7 happened, because they just left them aside. Let's do all of these normalization agreements with the Arab regimes and just, get on with it and just ignore the Palestinians living there as if they just don't exist. If you do that, you have an October 7 and you have events like this, which are going to happen in resistance to what you are subjugating those people to. And you will have even worse events happen in the future if you were to destroy Hamas, for instance, because people are not going to just sit down and take their oppression. You either have to kill them all or drive them all out if you want to do it that way. Or the alternative is to have a democratic society for everybody, an equal society, a state where everybody lives side by side. Otherwise, it's going to keep going until one side wipes out the other. So you can't be talking about, sitting on your high horse and making these arguments, October 7 and all this. I could make the argument for what happened in 2014, 2012, 2008, 9. Those are just the main massacres that have recently happened in the Gaza Strip. 2021 occurred as well. Even the same year as last year, as October 7, the Israelis were bombing the Gaza Strip. And the year before that, they were bombing the Gaza Strip and launching military operations. They've been doing the same thing in the West Bank. The only solution is some sort of peaceful resolution to the conflict. However, the Israelis are not interested in this. So either one side wipes out the other or makes the other submit in a military conflict, or there is some sort of diplomatic solution. Right now, we can't see that anyone will agree to a diplomatic solution. So what is to happen? Right now, the Israelis are the aggressors. The Israelis are the ones with the power. The Palestinians are the people living under occupation and siege and subjected to genocide and apartheid. So if you're a rational actor, you're going to say, well, we want to remedy this situation and give people equal rights. That's the one thing they've refused to do this entire time, is give Palestinians their equal rights. Are the Palestinian citizens of Israel doing the same thing? Are they launching attacks against Israelis on mass scales and building rockets and forming armed groups? No, they're not. They're still not equal. They still don't have equal rights, but they don't do that. They don't behave in that way. So you can look at that and you can go, well, it's obviously the conditions we subject them to in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. That's why they resist. People resist oppression. Or you can go like the Israeli argument is, they're just inherently violent people and they just need to be eliminated. And that's the argument that many we see, even in the Republican Party most prominently in the United States, are making the arguments about sort of annihilation arguments, punishment and retribution. You can't do that to an oppressed people who don't have anything. They don't have any other options. If they could just live normal lives and have jobs and be employed regularly and just live stable lives, they wouldn't resist in this way. For instance, even if you look at the city of Ramallah in the West Bank and you compare it to Jenin refugee camp, there's a reason why Jenin refugee camp has the Jenin battalion armed groups which are there and have formed and are fighting the Israelis when they come in. And in Ramallah, there's no armed formations which are fighting, because the people have better conditions there. Not even perfect conditions. They still live under an apartheid regime, but they're considerably more well off than the people in Jenin, and that's the West Bank, not Gaza. So it's obvious where this is heading. It either heads in national suicide for the Israelis, or the Israelis decide to conduct a complete ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Palestinian people, which seems to be the way the Israeli government and all the political parties which are have any chance of winning and getting into government after Netanyahu, even if he, when he eventually is pushed out of power, they all are pursuing this apartheid, ethnic cleansing, genocide option. It's just in that sphere how to do that. And like you said, it's a discussion about how we should conduct this sort of a slow genocide or a quick genocide or the ethnic cleansing full scale and annexing this land and taking this land from them and pushing in this regard and that regard, and how we should tighten the security system on them to make their lives more unbearable, and how economically deprived they should be. And that's the discussion that's going on the Israeli side, not a discussion of these are human beings and there needs to be a solution to stop this, or else this is going to consume us too, because we live in the same land.
That's important that you frame this very well, Robert, is that the world is looking at this situation and they see the horrors that we've been subject to the last 7 months, and they see that as people getting killed, a massacre, a genocide. But on the Israeli side, and their supporters as well, but especially within the Israeli society, they're looking at this as a progress or a military objective, or, oh, we flattened northern Gaza, it's a parking lot now, that's a security buffer zone we've established for ourselves. Now we need to push a few 100,000 people out into the Sinai desert, maybe a couple of million. We need to annex more land in the Jordan Valley. We need to build more settlements in the West Bank. They're looking at it strategically. And so they're having a totally different conversation internally. So everything they do, they have to sell to the Israeli society as an achievement. But the rest of the world's not looking at that at it this way. We're starting to see the beginnings of the penny dropping with these international organizations like the ICC, the ICJ, and the UN condemning Israel, and maybe a little bit of pushback in the US with the student protests that have raised awareness to these issues. But within the hardcore political world, it's literally strategic, military, a war on terror. That's how the US is painting this, as a war on terror. So it's really hard to resolve this issue, Robert, when different parties in this are looking at it completely differently.
Well, the problem is, in my opinion, is the United States in this equation, because the United States is backing hook, line, and sinker the Israeli line. Immediately, they came out and U.S. President Joe Biden lied publicly about apparently seeing photos of terrorists beheading babies, confirmed images, and all of this nonsense. And even recently, he lied about seeing a video or a photo of Hamas burning to death a woman and her child together, which of course we know from the facts established on the ground it never happened. But they continue to espouse this rhetoric. The Speaker of the House came out in opposition and went to Columbia University to deliver a speech against these students at the encampment there. And he started making up new claims. He was saying they're raping babies now. They're raping babies, which was never even said before, but he's allowed to say this sort of thing. So on the US side, the government officials are actively trying to justify everything and anything the Israelis do, because they've made the decision, we need to murder them. How dare they stand up against us? How dare they ruin our wonderful plans to have a normalization deal with Saudi Arabia? We need to massacre them, murder them. They embarrassed our weapons companies. They embarrassed our security. They embarrassed our regional hegemony. So we need to destroy them. We need to annihilate them. We need to murder them. And the only way they can do that is by selling these ridiculous stories, which they come up with, about the 40 beheaded babies and the babies on hanging on clothing lines and all of these ridiculous things, these lies which they repeat. And the US government and US media are there perpetuating these lies. They're the ones as well spreading all the lies about UNRWA when that came out, so that they could justify defunding UNRWA in the middle of what the World Bank and the United Nations and multiple human rights organizations have said is a pending famine in Gaza, that people are going to starve to death en masse. They came out and they endorsed that. Then Channel 4 and eventually a bunch of other papers received this dossier and saw the same thing that the New York Times said when the New York Times was trying to give it credit, when they were the first ones to read this document about UNRWA when that came out. And they said, there's nothing here. They haven't given any evidence whatsoever. Recently, there's whole media nonsense about the United Nations revising down its death toll figures, which never happened. It was a complete lie. And all those statistics which they were citing came from the Gaza Health Ministry, which they just tried in their best way to butcher and manipulate the statements of the United Nations officials, the infographics which were published on UN websites in order to push forward this false narrative, questioning the death toll statistics. And we see as well the propaganda nonsense.
On the Gaza Ministry of Health, Robert, the talking point right across the board in America is that those are Hamas figures. How could you? I've heard Piers Morgan himself. So how can you trust the Gaza Ministry of Health? These are Hamas figures or propaganda or whatever. That's their talking point, is basically saying that the Gaza Ministry of Health is somehow staffed by hardcore Hamas militants bent on skewing the figures. But that's not true, is it?
No, and they're actively lying. They're intelligent enough to know, at least I think that Piers Morgan knows enough, for instance, to know that these are not Hamas figures. It's like me saying that the Israeli death toll published and the Israeli health authorities are the Netanyahu-run health authority and Netanyahu's figures. It's just a term to discredit them. Hamas was elected in 2006 to power. I'm not going to go through the entire history of it, but it is the governing force there in Gaza. So anyone attached to the civil administration and anyone attached to the health ministry there is technically under Hamas-ruled authority. However, the health ministry there, not only are their figures sent to Ramallah and updated in Ramallah before they're published, but also, which is run by the Palestinian Authority, Fatah Palestinian Authority, but also these figures are checked and they are ran by the United Nations, international human rights organizations, and unbiased bodies, which analyze and communicate with the Gaza Health Ministry. Historically, the Gaza Health Ministry statistics have always been trusted, and even by the Israelis. They've more or less correlated. There's been maybe 2 or 3 dead civilian difference or whatever it was during the different wars, for instance. So even the Israelis don't really dispute it, except this time, of course, now they're disputing it and they're painting it as Hamas figure. They never said the Hamas-run health ministry before, but the BBC will put Hamas-run health ministry. It's not Hamas-run because the implication of saying it's Hamas-run is to say that Ismail Haniyeh and Mohammed Deif and Abu Abeida are sitting there in a room and they're the ones typing in all of these figures. No, these are healthcare professionals. These are doctors. These are people with PhDs. These are qualified individuals who have worked not only in that position that they're in now in Gaza, but a lot of them outside. They've worked in Europe. They've worked in the United States. They've worked for the United Nations. These are people, credible people, who are documenting what they can in a situation where their healthcare system has all but collapsed. So they know they're lying. The likes of Piers Morgan, he knows that when he's pushing this nonsense, it's not true. They do, because they're intelligent enough to know that. And they've seen the reports throughout the years, and they've been around long enough to know that this is nonsense. And their arguments are nonsense.
Yeah, and the fact that Israel has bombed and I don't know how many medical facilities and hospitals in Gaza, like really destroying the entire healthcare system, like intentionally destroying it, targeting it. In fact, I mean, to gaslight away from that one fact is pretty incredible and breathtaking in the audacity of that. But I'm with Robert Inlakesh, independent journalist. Robert, when we come back, I want to ask you about this myth of the Abraham Accords, because this is a big part of the U.S. Political campaign of the presidency. They're saying they had peace in the Middle East. One of the things during the 2024 election that's resurfaced, Robert, is this talking point, especially on the Republican side, that, oh, there was peace in the Middle East and Biden ruined it. And October 7th happened. Everything was just peachy before October 7th. The Palestinians and the Israelis were skipping through the fields, having picnics together. And all of a sudden, Hamas went mad on the 7th, and then because of Biden's weakness, he didn't allow Israel to contain this problem, and the Abraham Accords broke down, and that was the peace process that somehow brought peace to the Middle East. First of all, Robert, did the Abraham Accords ever bring peace to the Middle East, and why did the Abraham Accords fail so miserably? Go ahead.
There's a number of aspects to that. Of course, in the case of the UAE, that's the most significant normalization deal in the group of normalization deals. For instance, Bahrain was included in that. Bahrain was, I believe, more of a test subject for the Saudis. When it came to Sudan, they basically blackmailed Sudan into that. We see the state that Sudan is in now. It hasn't brought peace to Sudan. It never did bring peace to that country by normalizing ties whatsoever, and heavy Israeli involvement with both sides of the leadership, which are warring in Sudan now, has not brought peace whatsoever. So that doesn't make any sense. On top of that as well, the normalization deal with Morocco. Basically, without getting too much into detail about what happened there, the United States essentially threatened, with the help of the United Arab Emirates, to economically burden Morocco, and also to reignite a historic conflict between Morocco and the Polisario Front over Western Sahara as well. And not only that, when they did normalize ties and the Israelis were more heavily involved and collaborating with the Moroccan military, we've seen that there has been considerable flare-ups between Algeria and Morocco. So not at all did it create any sort of peace or stability in the Middle East. That's a lie. Number two, and this is a key point which will shock those supporters of the Republican Party, because they're arguing this now, and those who watch Fox News, Biden has the exact same foreign policy and was pursuing the Abraham Accords, so-called Abraham Accords, just like Donald Trump was. There's no difference. It's the exact same thing, the exact same policy. In fact, it was because of the fact that the Biden administration turned a blind eye to what was happening on the ground, as did Donald Trump, by the way, in 2018 with moving the embassy over there, his so-called deal of the century in 2020, at the escalating tensions that were occurring, that there was an October 7th. Because the Biden administration, as well as the Trump administration, refused to try and remedy the situation on the ground, both in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. And also the extremists in the Israeli government, which they couldn't hold back. They give them a carte blanche, essentially, to insult the entire Arab and Muslim world by running their incursions into the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound and assaulting worshippers, not only Muslim worshippers in the old city, but Christian worshippers as well. And so the fact that they ignored this, and the fact that they even conspired in the West Bank to, under what's known as the Fenzil Plan, to try and combat the armed groups that emerged from 2021 in the West Bank by essentially creating a situation which would have led to a Palestinian civil war in the West Bank between the Palestinian Authority and the armed groups primarily operating in the northern West Bank, was the reason why this happened. This policy of, oh, well, we'll just be a bit more aggressive with the Palestinians and try and, put them in their corner and keep them contained as, things get more and more violent and the Israelis use more and more violence to repress them. And whilst that's happening, our number one foreign policy goal in the entire region is to normalize ties between Saudi Arabia and the Israelis. And it looked like it was going to happen. And do you know how much of a catastrophe that would be if Saudi Arabia and Israel normalized ties for the entire region? Whether it's under Donald Trump or whether it's under Joe Biden, you've got an active conflict still in Yemen, which could be a catastrophe because the United States and Saudi Arabia were talking about a security pact. Saudi Arabia wanted a security pact where the United States would essentially, it would be like the same clause built in to NATO membership that if one is at war, the rest are at war. If one's attacked, the rest are attacked. So the United States would be dragged into a war with Yemen, potentially. That could happen very quickly. The relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia could be greatly affected. And that conflict could be, that proxy conflict could be united again, where Iran has its allies in the region. Saudi Arabia backs absolutely everyone and anyone against them to fight them and start killing them. In fact, there was a little bit more peace because of the fact that there was a normalization of ties between Iran and Saudi Arabia. There were some conflicts where things, people were backing off. But the fact that they wanted to pursue this and the Arab NATO, that, of course, this is the same policy as what Donald Trump was pursuing in the region, is why you had October 7th. the Palestinians were left to the side. The Palestinians were put to the side, and they were considered as non-people, a non-issue. Just let them, slowly dwell and die in Gaza with no employment and no clean drinking water and unlivable conditions and no hope and no future, and not even the talk of a negotiation for a state or a settlement or anything like that anymore. We're not even bothering talking about it. So you can insult their religion. You can go and desecrate their holy sites. You can attack Muslim and Christian worshippers in the old city of Jerusalem. You can be demolishing their homes. You can talk about annexing Area C of the West Bank. You can be displacing the people in Naqab inside of what is called Israel proper, or 1948 Palestine. And that's just all fine. Let's just normalize ties. We have this new Hijaz railway, which we're going to put through Saudi Arabia, and we're going to have this big, trade deal, which is going to go on, and it's going to be wonderful. We're going to focus on oil and gas and all of this. That's the reason why we are where we are. And Donald Trump is the one that started that. So there has been no peace in the Middle East because the policy has been the same. The maximum pressure sanctions campaign against Iran, exactly the same. The policy in Syria of occupying Syrian territory and preventing there being a solution in Syria, the exact same thing. The policy of essentially having a quasi-occupation of Iraq as well. Again, the same thing, backing and propping up who they want there, and controlling the situation through finances and having a military presence in Iraq. That didn't change. Everything is aggressive. Everything is through destruction. Everything is through war. Everything is through forwarding the tunnel vision agenda of U.S. absolute hegemony in the Middle East, which they don't have anymore. They don't have the ability to do. And then they'll turn to situations like Afghanistan. Trump wanted to withdraw from Afghanistan too, not just Joe Biden. So the foreign policy front, it's exactly the same. Maybe there's a change when you're looking outside of West Asia and the Middle East, North Africa more broadly, for instance, and you're looking to whether Ukraine or Russia, Ukraine or Taiwan are the issue of the day for Republican or Democratic Party presidencies. But when we're looking at the Middle East, no, this is nonsense. The so-called Abraham Accords did not bring peace. And individuals like Jordan Peterson, for instance, who is a fantastical moron when it comes to foreign policy issues. He knows absolutely nothing. He uses words that he doesn't understand properly. And he mouths off about nonsense, which he doesn't understand properly, are espousing this absolute nonsense and these talking points, which if they actually debated somebody with any real knowledge on the issue, would be dismantled, destroyed, and embarrassed within seconds of trying to utter these talking points.
Yeah, he blocked me on Twitter yesterday. Funny enough that you mentioned that. He put out a tweet, Jordan Peterson, the great clinical psychologist, LARPing as a geopolitical analyst, put out a tweet that the pro-Hamas students in America were this was being backed by China and Russia somehow, and the Iranians too, and et cetera, et cetera. So again, just a beating on students, trying to defame them and delegitimize what is very clearly a organic global anti-war movement, the likes of which the establishment in the West have not seen before. And they're really shocked and taken back by the fact that Gen Zers got off their phones and took to the streets and campuses. And it's really upset a lot of people, not least of all the Israeli lobby that spent so much money trying to gaslight and propagandize these young minds over the years, Robert. I mean, they must really be upset in their war room that they spent hundreds of millions of dollars influencing online opinion, and they're getting trounced by people doing it for free. It's interesting how the truth works, doesn't it? But your final thoughts before we break on this segment. Go ahead, Robert.
No, I think it's very interesting what we've seen. And really, it was the reaction to the student protesters, this unhinged, insane reaction, like happened in Gaza, for instance, where it's just, throw the kitchen sink at them and do whatever you want, and accuse them of everything under the sun, and then use violence in order to put down, obviously, on a whole different scale in the Gaza Strip, but same mentality. Netanyahu instantly makes this grand speech calling them basically Nazis, comparing these students to Nazis at Columbia University. They called in the police, riot police, anti-terrorism units, SWAT teams, all of this to go and attack these students who are a diverse group of students. I've seen them in encampments as well, and I saw them them attack encampments unjustified over here in Canada as well. They did the same thing, same reaction. But it's interesting because in the United Kingdom, just before that, there were what they called occupations in their university instead of encampments. That's the language they used there in the UK. That was happening before, but nobody paid attention. The United States, that came out in full force. You've got the Speaker of the House coming out. You've got Joe Biden coming out. Benjamin Netanyahu is issuing his statements. The police are being brought into crackheads. They're threatening them with violence. The media is going insane about some woman that allegedly is stabbed in the eye with a Palestinian flagpole. All these nonsense incidents of so-called attacks. And then you have all of the pro-Israeli students as well coming and outsiders coming and attacking them too. And it's only birthed this international movement that we now see. And it's interesting that it's gone that way and quite inspiring.
It is. And I think you're just seeing the beginning of it because ladies and gentlemen, these kids are going to be in charge in 10 and 20 years. So I think it's going to be very interesting going forward. They can't unsee what they've seen in the last 7 months. Robert Inlakesh, independent journalist based in Canada. Thank you for joining us on TNT this week. And be sure to follow Robert Inlakesh on X, Twitter, and his other social media platforms. We'll drop those in the TNT chat community as well as on our show post on X, Twitter. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a fantastic program. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place.